Alright, welcome back. In this video, I'll go over how to customize your widgets using StyleSheets. We will go over how to change colors. This includes changing the background color, the text color, as well as adding gradients, adding some spacing, music, padding, and margin, as well as modifying the text, such as the font family, as well as the font size, and much more. Now, just to give a brief introduction to what StyleSheets are, they are essentially a way that you can specify styling for widgets. They are quite similar to CSS, which is what is used to style websites on the web, but there is quite a big difference here, being that most properties from CSS do not work here. But I will walk you through the properties that you can use and how you can use those to make your applications look better. So to start, I have just some starter code here with a login form layout. You can find this starter code in the GitHub link below. This is just a simple login form with a few labels and 2 line-headed input widgets as well as a push button. To set the style sheet of the main window, we will use self.setStyleSheet. In this case, self refers to our QMainWindow object. And this style sheet method expects a string, but instead of just declaring our string with double quotes, we will need to use a multi-line string. And to add a multi-line string within Python, we will need to use 3 single quotes at the beginning and at the end, like so. To be able to set these styles within our style sheet, we first need to select the widget that we want to modify. In this case, we will first modify the QMainWindow widget. So I'll write QMainWindow to select it, and then I'll enclose the styles that I want to use for it within 2 curly braces. And in particular, we will first look at how to change the background color. And to change the background color, we can use the background color property. We then need to use a colon to separate it from the value that we want to use. And in this case, I'll give it a value of light blue, which is the background color we will use. And for each property within our style sheet, we need to end it with a semicolon like so. So if we run our application now, we can see that our entire QMainWindow object now has a background color of light blue. The question that you probably have now is that how would you know which colors are available? To do that, you can go to this website, which I'll link in the description below. And from there, you can see all of the available colors that you can just write out as words. These are sort of preset colors that you can just use as words. But if you instead would want something more specific, you can use something like a color picker. In this case, this is just the color picker that is within Google. And then once you have selected a color, you can just copy the hex code. And then you can just use the hex code as the value of our background color property over here. Besides just the background color, we can also change the text color within our application. To do that, we will first select all of the QLabel objects, and then we will use the color property. In this case, just to showcase what it looks like, I'll change the text color of all of them to white. And we can also once again use a hex code instead. If instead of just a plain color, you wanted to set the background color to a gradient, for example, we can use the QLinearGradient function. To do this, we will set the background color of the QPushButton object to a gradient, and we can do it like so. We will set the background color property to the QLinearGradient function. This function expects a few values that we will need to specify. The first 2 is where we want the gradient to start at within our widget. So we need to specify that by specifying x0, 0, and y0, 0. This means that our gradient will start at the top left hand corner. And then we'll need to specify x1 and y1, and this specifies where our gradient ends. In this case, I'll use 0, 1 as the end location of our gradient, so it will go from top to bottom We will then need to specify the colors that we want to use. We can specify that by using stop:0, and then we need to enter a color value. And if you're having problems trying to choose the different colors for your gradients, there's a website that I'll link below as well. And this just has some pre-made colors made by other designers that you can just easily use within your application. So I'll copy the first hex code over. Next, we need to specify the ending color. So we can do this by specifying stop:1 and the next color. If we run our application now, we can see that we have a basic linear gradient. Now I'll just go over how the positions for our linear gradient affect the gradient. Before we do that, I'll first increase the height of our push button using the setMinimumHeight method. So right now, our start location of the gradient is at the top right hand corner, and the ending location is at the bottom left hand corner. So our gradient goes from top to bottom. But if we instead wanted it to go diagonally, we can specify the gradient to start at the top left hand corner and end at the bottom right hand corner by using an x1 location of 1. So basically that means at the end on both axes. Alright, now that we've looked at the first few basic properties to customize our widgets, we will look at a few more ways to select different widgets within our application. The first one is using an asterisk, and this basically selects all of the widgets within our application. So for example, if we specify the color property to this hex code that I have, then it applies to all of the widgets within our application. If we instead only wanted to select one widget, what we can do is to set the object name of that widget. For example, if we wanted to only select the login label widget, or set the object name to login label. This can be any name. We can then select it by using a # followed by the object name that we've given. In my case, I will change that to a blue color. And now it only applies to that widget with that object name. And just as a side note, the blue color will override the color that we've set for all of the widgets, and that's because selecting a widget by its object name is more specific than just selecting all of the widgets using the asterisk. Alright, the next property we will look at is padding. Padding allows us to add some spacing within our widgets, which can help to increase the size of our widgets. So to showcase what padding does, I'll first remove the minimum height of our push button. And now if we run our application, the push button's height is as small as it needs to be. But if we instead add some padding now, this will increase the push button on the top, left, right, as well as the bottom. Now since the push button spans from left to right entirely, the padding on the left and right sides are not visible. But we can see that there is some padding being applied to the top and the bottom of the push button widget. We can also apply this to the Q line edit widget, for example. So if we run the application, we can see that the Q line edit widget now has padding applied on all 4 sides, and the overall size of the Q line edit widget has increased. And in this case, the left and right padding is more visible here. And if we instead wanted to remove it and only add padding to the top and bottom of our widget, what we can do is to specify a padding of 10 pixels and then 0 pixels. So what this represents is 10 pixels on the top and bottom and 0 pixels on the left and right. If we run the application now, the padding on the left and right sides have now been reduced. Just to make the line edit look better, I'll change the top and bottom padding to 5 pixels. Another property that we can specify is the border property. This adds a border around the widget. So for example, if we add a border to the Q label, we can specify this as 1 pixel, the size of the border, solid the type of border, and gray as the color. And besides just a solid border, we can also, for example, use a dotted border. I will leave a link to all of the possible types of border if you would like to look into how you can further customize your borders. You might also notice that around our Q push button widget, there is sort of some default styling applied, and that's actually a border applied already by default. And we can actually remove that using the border property as well by setting it to a value of none. And that removes the default border that is around our widget, and it looks a little better, especially when we use our gradient. Another useful property is the border radius property. This allows us to make rounded corners. For example, if I specify a border radius of 5 pixels, you can see that our push button now has rounded corners on all 4 sides. Also add a 5 pixel border radius to the Q line edit widget. Let me also add some padding to the left and right sides of our Q line edit widget. And as you can see, our application now looks a little more modern compared to the default widgets that come with PyQt6. If we look at our application now, we can see that the line edit widget and the push button widgets are quite close together. If we want to separate them, we can use the margin property, which adds space between our widgets. For example, if I add a margin of 10 pixels, there is 10 pixels between my Q push button and everything else. But in my case, I just want to add a 10 pixel margin on the top and 0 everywhere else. So I can do that by specifying 10 pixels for the top, 0 for the left, 0 for the bottom, and 0 for the right margin. The last few properties we will look at are related to changing the text of our application. The first one we will look at is changing the font family. And I'll apply that to all of the widgets within our application. I will specify a font family of Times New Roman. And if we run our application now, we can see that the Times New Roman font has been applied to all of the widgets within our application. And just take note that the font family you have chosen here needs to be a font that is installed on the user's computer. And you can quite easily find which fonts are installed on different operating systems by, for example, searching Windows 10 font list. And in this case, Microsoft has a list of all of the fonts that come pre-installed with their operating system. But usually you have a few other fonts installed on your computer as well. And you can find the fonts that you have installed by going to your C drive under Windows and within the fonts folder. That's how you would find it for Windows, but you might need to search it out if you are using a different operating system. In my case here, I have the font Montserrat installed on my computer, so I'll just specify that as the font family that I'll be using since it looks much better. We can also give it a size by using the font size property. I'll change my font size to 20 pixels. Before we do that, I will also increase the height of my application. What I'll probably want to do is to change the default font size to 15 pixels and the font size of the login label to 20 pixels. Since it is more specific than just selecting all the elements, that 20 pixels will override the 15 pixels that we have given to all of the widgets. I will now just spend some time customizing my application with different font sizes, colors, and different font families. Feel free to do the same with your application. And I will leave the ending code in the GitHub link below as well if you would like to take a look at how I did it. Another useful property is the text decoration property that allows you to, for example, underline all of the text. I'll leave a documentation to a few other text decoration properties as well that you can use. But in our case, it doesn't really fit well with the application, so I'll remove it. And the last property that I'll showcase here is the font weight property, and that essentially specifies how bold or thin we want our font to be. You can specify any value from 0 to 1000, 1000 being the most bold, and usually you would specify that as increments of 100. In our case, I'll specify a font weight of 900, and if we run our application, the font is quite bold. But this does depend on the fonts you have installed on your computer and the types of weight that they have supported for them. Here is just a quick recap of all of the properties that we use in this video, as well as a short description of them that you can refer to. I will also leave a link to the documentation on Qt for all of the properties that you can use for each widget. And that's about it for this video. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future videos such as PyQt6 tutorials, feel free to leave them in the comments below. If this video has helped you, or if you've enjoyed this video, please consider possibly subscribing or liking this video to help my channel and to see more of such content.